welcome everyone to the ninth episode of Random Musings. Also, hi to everyone who is listening to this on a podcast platform like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, anywhere. And special hello to everyone watching it on YouTube, where you're supposed to watch it. But very excited about this episode because this episode features a guest who has been a part of Random Musings virtually right from the beginning, in terms of giving inputs, in terms of giving feedback, and in terms of just being a nice person. Our guest today is a very talented writer, comedy producer, quizzer, also a comedian. Give it up for Srimay Das.
Hello, hi. Thank you for
Hi,
having
Srimay.
me.
Hi, Srimay. Hi, hi. This, I told my viewers that we are doing a Kolkata trilogy of sort. We had
Yes.
Nirban Das Gupta, followed by Saurabh Mehta, and now you. So why not straight? Let's talk about Calcutta. Okay, your view of Calcutta is a little different than say Saurabh Anirban and many other people,
Yeah.
because I know that you went to school in Calcutta and then you left Calcutta after school. You went to Delhi, then you came to Bombay. So I assume your look or your memories of Calcutta will be very nostalgic in nature. But still, I'm very curious to know your memories of Calcutta, what you think about the city. Because I remember the last time I went there, you were my tour guide. You took me to all the nice food places. You took me to all the
Yeah.
nice places that are from your memory of Calcutta. So let's start from there, Shrimoy. Tell me something about Calcutta.
I just want to start off by saying I was not your tour guide. You were my tour guide to Calcutta and what all is left to see over there. So that's one correction I have to say. But yeah, you're right. I was born there. I grew up there. And then when I was 18, I was thrown out of the house to go and study in Delhi. And so I've never lived as an adult in Calcutta. I was watching Anirban and Saurav's episode, and I realized that both of them at some point have gone back to Calcutta after leaving it. They've both worked there. I have not worked there, so I don't have the same problems that everybody else has about Calcutta, that it's a bad place to work in and it's slow and all of that. I don't care. I just feel like it was a great place to grow up in. It was, and so when I look at it, I look at it with a very, rosy eyed, nostalgic view. And I think a lot of that has got to do with the fact that when I left home, I was very homesick. So I tried to find connections with Calcutta everywhere, like everything I read or everything I watched. And I started appreciating Calcutta even more. Actually, I only started appreciating Calcutta when I left and I went to Delhi because I just missed it so much.
You've lived in all these three major cultural centers of India, Calcutta, Delhi, and then Bombay. What do you think makes Calcutta unique when you compare it to these two huge metropolis, Bombay and Delhi?
I think I think in Calcutta, like maybe this is a really privileged viewpoint, but I think everyone has a great appreciation of life and, like, of what they say, the finer things in life. Like everybody really appreciates art and food and music and culture. I know these are stereotypes about Calcutta and about Bengalis, but it's true also. Like we do enjoy our Sunday lunches and our adda sessions and the chai and cigarettes and cricket. Whereas I feel like in the other two cities that I've lived in, things are more transactional and material, but I don't feel that in Calcutta. I think that's the biggest difference. And I think that's also probably the reason why Calcutta is criticized so much, because I guess you can't like make a corporate career um,
Mm,
over there like you can in Bombay and Delhi, I
mm,
suppose. But I'm just saying it again. It was a lovely place to grow up in. And now that I have met people who grew up in Delhi and Bombay as well, I'm just so glad that I grew up in Calcutta, because it sort of gives you the time to figure out your own interests and develop without worrying so much about like what will happen after this and what are your, what is next to achieve.
mm, mm. You talked about stereotypes, Bengali or Bong stereotypes in the middle. So I want to explore that further.
Yeah.
I know unlike some other Calcutta people, you are a Bengali, born and brought up in Calcutta, with Bengali parents, with a Bengali brother, with a very Bengali roots. I know both your parents are doctors and your brother went to IIT. So you see, there's some sort of that Bengali stereotype of, of extra stress on education and culture. And I think you grew up learning musical instruments, watching Satyajit Ray movies, appreciating Tagore more than a normal Indian would. So I want to talk about some of these stereotypes and your family. And is it true that you went through this very ambitious parent stereotype where you were, sort of like asked to achieve more than a normal kid would?
In terms of stereotypes, yes. I fit all the Bengali stereotypes. I'd love to say stereotypes don't exist, but I'm proof that they do. Everything, like, laziness. I like fish. I just like talking too much. Very opinionated as a person. Very ambitious parents. A lot of focus on math and science growing up. Uh, as you said, brother obviously went to IIT, and there was a lot of emphasis to do well in studies, and not just to do like to be successful, but also like to tick off those boxes, as in like go to a good college, preferably study science, and then not be happy with just a graduation, but preferably do a post graduation or a PhD and whatever. And I challenged my parents at every point in my life. I was not a rebellious child in the sense that I didn't like, go out drinking and just have sex every night or whatever they show on Amazon Prime or wherever these days. But I was very rebellious in the sense that ever since I think I was 12 or 13, I challenged everything my parents said or every thought process that they had. Obviously, I came from that privilege where I could challenge it and get away with it. But it also helped me because now I barely have any conflicts with my parents, because I'm just so used to living life my own way that now it doesn't bother me anymore. Whereas I know a lot of people who have followed the conventional things, done everything their parents expected them to. So it's very difficult for them at 25 or 30 to break out of that pattern. Whereas I broke out of it at 13. So whether it was like not studying science and not becoming a doctor or an engineer, or at least studying economics, if nothing else. So I chose to study humanities in 11, 12. Then I said that I will not study economics also. So I went and studied English. Then I didn't do my master's immediately. I got a job at an NGO, not even like a proper job, as my parents would say. So that was another point of rebellion. Then when they wanted me to do my master's, I didn't do it. I did something else. When they wanted me to apply abroad and go abroad to study more, I didn't do it. They didn't want me to do comedy. I did it. They didn't want me to do like lead a freelance life. I did it. They didn't want me to get into a relationship when I got into one, and well, I'm in one. So at every point, I have disappointed them, and well, I mean, they've just learned to live with it.
Wow. If there was ever not a relatable content, this is it for me. Like I've always tried to do what they expected me to do. Oh man. But yeah, wonderful listening to that, Shrimoy. And that you talked about school and colleges. I want to go there next, because talking about stereotypes, I've realized this about myself, that no matter how much I respect people's art and their talent and their qualities, somewhere in the back of my mind, I have realized it of late, is that I really value where they studied. you know, like every time I look at celebrities, also I'm like, great actor. But then, like, oh, he studied there. Suddenly, my perception changes, and I know, I should not be like that. We should be like, hey, formal education is not really important, or like it's a privilege, or not everyone gets a chance there for several reasons. But I can't help it. When I hear someone went to a school or college that I admired, or sometimes when I could not get into, I feel maybe low-key jealous, but also very, very, I appreciate them much more. And that is why I appreciate you more. And I'll explain why. I spoke to Saurabh Mehta in the last episode about La Martiniere, Calcutta, and I know you went to La Martiniere for girls in Calcutta. That is my first point of jealousy. I went to a very mediocre, simple school in Noida, which has nothing to, like, no comparison to the Lamarts of the world. Then you went to LSR, Lady Shriram, in Delhi University, which is one of India's best colleges. Which, growing up in Delhi, I really like, I was in awe of these DU colleges like St. Stephen's or Hindu or Venki or Hansraj, LSR, SRCC. And I used to be like, man, if I could ever study in these colleges, which could not happen because I had to do engineering. I did eventually go to Delhi University for my MBA, But I always like anytime I meet someone who's like, hey, I'm from Stephens, I'm like, man, you went to Stephens, you did something I could not. So I want to talk to you about these schools, these colleges, and then we'll slowly talk about, because you talked about NGO and I can't help but not talk about TFI and teaching, etc. But let's start with school and colleges and tell me your opinion. I know a lot of times what happens is when you meet someone from these colleges and you say, oh man, you went to Stephens, their first reaction, हाँ ऐसा ही है यार, not a big deal. That's how I react when someone says you went to FMS. I'm like, theek tha. So I don't know. I want you to take me through from La Martiniere to LSR to Xavier's, that journey.
Very honestly, I didn't think so much about my school and college. I was like one of those people. I was either lucky or unlucky, whatever way you put it. But I went to the same school all my life. I joined that school when I was 3 years old, 3.5, and I left that school when I was 18. So I didn't know anything else when I left that school. That was the only world I knew. And I mean, that's not a great place to be at when you're 18, when you know nothing else except that very elite world, to be very honest. And then I went to LSR, which in its own way is quite elite. And both these schools were girls' institutions, even though La Martiniere had La Martiniere for boys right opposite the street. And it was great to meet them at fests and also on the road after school, because that's where all the dating would happen. But I didn't study with boys till I reached my master's level, actually. So that was a major disadvantage. The other disadvantage was, as I said, it was elite. And very honestly, because I didn't know better, I didn't think about this at all till I started working at Teach for India, and I started teaching. I came to Bombay to teach at a government school. That's when I moved to Bombay. And obviously it was like, that was only when it hit me about like how elite my upbringing had been. Because it was obviously completely different, because La Martiniere is like elitist of elite, and TFI was obviously like the socioeconomic class was. I was teaching underprivileged kids, and immediately after I left TFI, I also started working with another group where I was teaching kids to write essays to go abroad after their schooling. So I went from teaching really underprivileged kids to really, really, really privileged kids. And that's a journey that I find very, very interesting, because at TFI, I realized how privileged I was. It changed me as a person. Like everything I am now, I think is because of TFI. It gave me like skills, obviously, like communicating with people and, just being confident in front of a group of people. But it also gave me basic things like empathy and kindness. And it's so sad, but these were things that I don't think I really had before that. I was obviously capable of it, but it was never valued or taught or anything. And I never really thought about it that much. TFI was wonderful, and it just changed everything. It changed my whole outlook. And everything before that was just, I don't even count it as my education. I'm just like, yeah, there were moments where I had fun and I made some good friends, but, and I had one or two wonderful teachers, but that's it. I just don't think of it as my education. Now that I'm saying it, it sounds really privileged, and I went to these two really, really elite institutions, but it didn't teach me 10% of what I just learned being in the government school that I taught in Bombay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difference, as people say, between education and learning. Like you might be a very educated person, but you probably have learned nothing in your life. And I know a lot of people who are listening to this will be like, man, that's okay. You went to LSR. Don't say
you're not saying it.
Yeah, I know. But I know what you mean, because a lot of life lessons are not taught in classrooms. You might be great at quoting, Shakespeare and Pythagoras, and I don't know, history of Indus Valley civilization, and I don't know, Babylon and American Civil War, but it does not teach you about life. To give people context, TFI is Teach for India. So you started teaching after graduation from LSR, and you were teaching primarily underprivileged kids in very in parts of Bombay which are, which are so called low in the socioeconomic strata
Low
of
income
the
group.
city, low income groups, and you're going to slums and teaching them, and that's when the proverbial the eye opener moment of your life happens, when you're like, oh man, where did I study all my life, and what are these kids going through, and will they ever get to learn in an environment where I learned, and things that I took for granted all my life are something that people aspire for all their life, and they probably never achieve it. I want to talk about it in a little more detail with you, Sriman, because it's wonderful. I don't know many people who've actually taught kids, because teaching itself is an experience. uh, on top of that, I know a lot of people who teach like B school students, and like they do courses where they teach them, they teach adults, but teaching kids might be a very different task altogether. So I want to talk about, and you already said how it impacted your life and how you learned new things, but I want to delve into it deeper and see how it felt teaching kids. And did you, while teaching them, did you learn new things that you would have otherwise never learned? And how was that entire those years of teaching them?
Um, so I was teaching grades 4 and 5. It was a 2 year fellowship, and these kids were essentially like 9 year olds, 10 year olds. Um, the problem with schools and classes at that level is that, and this is not at all unique to my classroom, but the problem is now, because there is no you don't hold back kids in a class if they are not doing well. Till class 8 you can just pass every year. So there are a lot of kids in every class who will not know their ABCs, or basic addition, subtraction, multiplication. And there will also be kids in your class who will be able to read, like in fourth standard, they will be able to read their Harry Potters and Ruskin Bonds or whatever you give them. So it's really, really difficult to, as a teacher, to balance that and somehow teach these 40 kids in one go. So that is the teaching part of it. But even just like the social and the psychological understanding of these kids to go there and understand, because obviously we don't come from those backgrounds. We've not had the experiences that they've had. And it's very difficult to sort of connect and understand where they are coming from, to understand why they are acting up. A lot of these kids, at least my classroom, was quite an aggressive classroom. There would be fights, and there would be a lot of abusive language. They'd break furniture and things like that. And obviously, like, I'm tiny myself, so it's not like I'm this big 6 foot person who's coming and scolding them and being authoritative. A lot of them were like, if they hit me, I would not be able to defend myself. um, and But somehow you still have to manage and just get them to pay attention, I guess. PFI really encourages you to go out there, meet the kids' parents, see what they're like at home. Obviously, this is not something that used to happen in our schools. Like, our teachers didn't come to our houses and have a chat with my mother. But we were encouraged to do that because, at least I think in most of our schools, our teachers came from the same socioeconomic backgrounds, more or less. And they more or less had an understanding of how we lived, how our parents lived, and so on. Whereas we obviously don't have that understanding with these kids. So it was important to go out and do that. For most of us, if we don't understand something in school, our parents will help us out, or a lot of us are able to afford private tuition or something like that. Whereas these kids are first generation learners, probably first generation in their family to even go to school, forget about learning English. So they don't have that kind of help at home. They don't have that kind of atmosphere at home where people are studying, where academics is really valued, or that they can see that their lives have changed through academics. So it's, when you're teaching them, you're not just trying to teach them basic maths, English, reading, writing, but you're also trying to change a mindset, which is very, very difficult to do, especially if they don't have a role model where they can see that this has worked for somebody, so it might work for me. You can't see success at that rate. Like, in your own schools, you're not measuring success through like whether the child is behaving or not or something. Mostly it's like, okay, you teach and then they get good grades and whatever, they pass or whatever. But here it's like every day you go to school and these kids are just not paying attention to you. And they are constantly fighting, and I'm trying to make sure every day that at least these kids don't fight, and that doesn't happen in one day. So basically you spend 2 years and every day you think that, okay, there is no improvement. And an outsider might come and say after 6 months that, no, I can see this improvement. But it's like when you lose weight, that you think every day you look the same to yourself because you're seeing yourself every day. But when somebody else comes and says that I'm seeing you after 3 months and I can see that you've lost weight, but you can't see it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us don't understand the mindset aspect that you talked about when it comes to education, because in a lot of issues that our country faces, and because we, especially when I say we, I mean people who are sitting in their, privileged air-conditioned rooms with a laptop and talking about issues that the country is facing. It's so easy to just say that, oh, literacy is going down. We need more people in school, more kids in school. It's only when you understand as to why those kids are not coming to school. There are so many kids who actually have day jobs. There are so many kids who actually go out, help their parents with their job, with a mechanic shop or some menial labor they're all doing, and they don't see the value in wasting that time in school. They're like, I don't know what am I going to achieve here while I'm earning money every single day helping my parents. That happens in villages, that happens in slums in cities, and a lot of people don't understand that. And that's why I always think of the example of midday meal, and how midday meal was such a revolutionary idea, because a lot of people realize that if you give them food in school, that might be a motivator for them to come to school. You can't go to parents and tell them, hey, if your kid studies, this will happen 5 years later, this will happen 10 years later. So yeah, that is such a great perspective to look at it. Cool. I want now to go through this next stage of your life. Till now we know you grew up in Calcutta, you went to La Martiniere, you studied there all your life, you went to LSR, you went to Delhi, you came to Bombay, you also did your masters later from Xavier's. But in all of this, somewhere something called comedy begins. Okay, you do a little bit of stand up, and that is where you are part of not just my but almost all comedians life, is because you and Rohan start this wonderful thing called Green Revolution, who are without doubt one of the best comedy producers in Bombay. So I want to talk about that phase now, and personally me, and not just me, I speak on behalf of many comedians who love performing for Green Revolution, who appreciate how you guys keep coming up with the newer concepts more than just standard stand-up shows. I remember you guys started a debate thing. You guys started a lot of crowd work shows before anyone else did. And I think Rahul spoke in Random Musings about how you guys inspired him to do his own crowd work show. Quizzing with the Comedians owes a lot to your motivation, and the first few offline shows that happened before pandemic hit was with Green Revolution in Mumbai. Inshallah, we'll resume when we get back to normalcy. But the point being that you guys have been pushing the envelope in Indian comedy a lot. And this I say as a comedian and as a performer at many shows of Green. So I want you to take us through this aspect of your life, because a lot of people who watch comedy online particularly or watch shows do not understand what goes behind the show. They look at a comedian who enters, performs, and then leaves. They don't know that there are people behind the show who are planning the show. They are planning the lineup. They are handling all the logistics behind it, from ticketing to venue, to their own sets of challenges, like coordinating with venue, sharing profit, paying the comedians. That's also one thing that in Revolution has to be accredited for. And a lot of people might not know this, but we don't really are used to being paid for open mics. But I think Green Revolution is one of those producers who without fail have always paid it, even if it's a small amount. We've always been paid for Green Revolution show. So that also. So I want you to enlighten, so to speak, our viewers about what is it that entails the job of being a comedy producer and everything that goes behind the scene, and any learnings, any thoughts, any challenges. Just talk to us about Green Revolution and being a comedy producer.
So during TFI, when I was in Bombay, I decided that I would, not wait for other people to hang out with me. I didn't know a lot of people in Bombay, so I just decided I'd go out on my own and see the city and explore it. And that's when I discovered comedy. Like, I had never seen a stand-up comedy show till 2015. And it's quite late because I hear everybody, talk about how they started with seeing Khamba or Tanmay in their early days, but like legit, the first comedian I saw was Rahul Subramanian, which is also why I love him so much. And I mean, you know, at a time when he was just doing like these 10-minute spots and all of that. And I watched a lot of comedy shows. I was one of those annoying audience members who would just come for every open mic. And I could only afford open mics because I was working with an NGO, so I didn't have a lot of money. So I could never go to proper auditorium shows and all. And like I would really, really save up and go to like when Aisi Taisi Democracy was performing, because they didn't do like you know, random 100 rupee ticket kind of shows. But otherwise, I would go for a lot of these open mics, and I knew a lot of these comedians. I just knew them because I saw them every week, and I knew all their sets, and I just really, really enjoyed it. And after I finished TFI in 2017, I just decided I'd try out performing, because I was just like, yeah, maybe, you know, how bad can I really be? So I tried it out. And then I realized that, I mean, performing is fine and writing is fine, but what I really want to do is that I want to start programming my own comedy shows. Because I had a lot of opinions on how shows were curated and how shows were organized. In those days, if you were doing open mics, then you either had to pay for the ticket yourself, or you had to bring a friend along and pay for their ticket, plus travel, plus, you know, shows would happen at night, so dinner or something. So you end up spending 400 to 500 rupees every time you do a show. And when you're new in an open micer and just starting out, you're encouraged to do, like you're told that you have to do shows every night. Now, 500 rupees every night is not feasible for most of us. And I was not working. I had gone back to do my master's in Xavier's at that time. So I could not afford 500 rupees. And I did not have so many friends also who will come and watch me perform. Because of these two things, I had a lot of opinions on how open mics are run and how I could do things differently if I was doing it. Then I got really lucky because I started, Ruben, who was already organizing shows, asked me to help him out. He was like, it's okay, you like it, so come and help me out. And because I did that for about 5-6 months, I learned a lot. Like I didn't start Grin with no knowledge of how shows worked. And while doing that, I realized that, you know, obviously it felt much better if I was doing it for myself. So I convinced Rohan that this is something we must do. And somehow he agreed, like he agrees to all these crazy things that I come up with. And yeah, so that's how we started Grin. We started in 2018. And one of the only things we knew at that point of time was that we would pay all the comedians. You know, like if it was an open mic, we figured there would be very little that we could pay. But even if it was 200 rupees, 300 rupees, whatever, we would pay everybody who performed with us, because I was just like 300 rupees takes care of your travel, more or less. So at least, you know, if that gets sorted, you are just able to do more spots. And we obviously don't have that +1 rule. So I was like, at least, you know, the comedian shouldn't feel like I paid money and traveled and went and did the spot. Our aim was that we would take care of travel when we started. And because we obviously didn't have a lot of money to start off with, we realized that to pay comedians, we need to make money ourselves, because we don't have like a big fund. So we tried to do whatever was possible to make money. It was a long-term thing that we would make money. And I think that was essentially, like, we did not do Grin to save the comedy scene or as a favor to anybody. Essentially, Grin is a business, and we want to make money out of it. But we also believe in having good shows and paying comedians and ensuring that everyone has fun, because that's so important. I see a lot of comedians who just make it seem like they're just doing a job. Like they left one job and they came here and now they are doing another job, except now instead of 9 to 5, it's like 5 to 9 in the morning or something like that. But there's just no joy in some comedians, and I see them perform. And that's why I think we wanted to do these format shows, so that we ourselves as audience also saw new and interesting things every time the comedian was performing. And the comedians also felt like they were doing something different and interesting. So that was the motivation. And what goes on behind it is a lot of stress and is a lot of fights, and usually ends with me crying. But it's been great so far.
The one lesson I take from this entire story, and I want this to be stressed again for our viewers and audience, is that the wonderful thing I took out from this was that how if you don't like something, or if you have inputs, or if you think you can do it better, might as well do it. This is becoming more and more important in the world of internet, because when you go on internet, everyone has opinion about everything, but no one is doing anything. Like you go to a show, you saw that, okay, maybe open mics can be run better, or maybe I can do it better, and I'll give it a shot. And you did it. That's the whole point.
I think that way comedy is also very democratic in the sense that anybody can start their shows, and somebody else might not like the way Grin is working. So, you find your own venue and start your own show. It's like, it's not like you need a license or a permission, or, it's not like that. It's not like there are a lot of steps that you have to follow. And anybody can perform also, mostly, if you have certain level of privilege and money.
Yeah, I agree. The entry barrier here is obviously less compared to, say, you didn't like how the country is run, so you can't say ki Banja Prime Minister. No, I know it's a long way to go there. But essentially, it's a good thing to learn in life, to try and do things. The lesson there, of course, is that you can do instead of just saying and giving opinions. Wow, talking of opinions, I want to come to one thing where you have always had a very positive response, which is this guy called Shah Rukh Khan. Okay. And, Shah Rukh Khan is not just one of India's biggest stars, but he's also one of the most discussed stars. Okay. I'll give you a little perspective from my end, which is like I grew up in the 90s. So, of course, Shah Rukh Khan was the biggest thing when I was growing up. Like I remember I watched Bazigar in a hostel as a kid, and then I saw Dar, and I was like, oh my God, what is happening? Like when we saw Bazigar Dar, we had never seen an actor like that. Like I was a kid in the hostel, and we saw the climax, and we were all, the entire hostel, all of us, all the kids were like, oh my God, what is happening? Madan Chopra, like, oh, and we have grown up with him. We grew up with him. When he went to Europe and was doing the entire Senorita thing. We were like, nice, cute guy. Then, he became a father in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, and he kept trying other things as well. Mostly failed because people could not relate to what he was trying to do. And that's why Dil Se flopped. Swadesh flopped. So people were like, hey, no, man, don't do this. Do the other thing. Do Mehuna and it'll be a hit. Or like, do Veer Zara and it'll be a hit. We've lived life through Shah Rukh. Like Shah Rukh has been a part of our life. We lived through him through Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Dil Se, Swadesh, Veer Zara, and then later Om Shanti Om, and then that phase where there's nothing of note that has come in more than a decade. But we are still awed by the personality of Shah Rukh Khan. We still look out for his interviews. We still look out for what he has to say about things. What is Shah Rukh up to? Every time we meet someone who has worked with Shah Rukh, we want to ask him like, hey, how is he in real life? We are all obsessed with Shah Rukh Khan, and you more than anyone else I know. So I want to know like your journey with Shah Rukh Khan. It started a little late because it's slightly younger. So when you took birth, Shah Rukh was already a star, but you still did grow up with him. So I want to know from you this about your obsession and your analysis and your opinion of the legend of Shah Rukh Khan.
I've always loved Shah Rukh. I just don't remember a time in my life where I didn't love him, because as you said, by the time I was old enough to think, I was, or like legit, the first movie I saw in a theater was Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. I was 5 years old then. And before that, my brother was a Shah Rukh Khan fan, and I wanted to be exactly like he was. So I became a Shah Rukh Khan fan. My cousins were Shah Rukh Khan fans. My neighbors were Shah Rukh Khan fans. I think everybody in the late 90s was a Shah Rukh Khan fan. You just couldn't ignore him. So I very thoughtlessly became a Shah Rukh Khan fan, and I am still completely thoughtless when it comes to him. I like to believe that I am very logical. Otherwise, I can be objective, but not with Shah Rukh. I just didn't know anything other than Shah Rukh in the 90s. Everybody I knew was a Shah Rukh Khan fan. I also decided I would like Shah Rukh. I was very loyal to him. I never got swayed, not with this phenomena of Hrithik Roshan or anybody. I was always loyal. I can forgive anything he does. Even like I can forgive the bad movies. I can forgive any bad behavior or whatever people say. With Shah Rukh, I just don't have morals or anything.
Oh man.
And I think a lot of that has, as you said, a lot of that has got to do with his personality. In the 90s, he was like the figure of aspiration. because he had, he was the middle class dream as a child. You're always told that if you work hard, you know, if you're smart, intelligent, you work hard, you can achieve anything. And Shah Rukh was the poster boy for that. He had just achieved so much, and he made you feel like this is possible. In spite of achieving all that, when you watch his interviews or when you hear him speak, he just seems like such a smart, intelligent, witty person. I think I have some like I just like witty people who can come up with one-liners also. That's another problem. But yeah, I think it was that aspirational thing about Shah Rukh that also really drew me to him. But now I'm just intellectualizing everything. The truth is, I just fell in love when I was 2 years old, and then I was very loyal to that love.
No, at the risk of further intellectualizing the phenomenon of Shah Rukh Khan, I would like to say that he inspired a lot of people because he was truly a self-made star. He came from Delhi to Bombay and started from the bottom, did TV shows, small parts, etc., and then became a star and became the biggest star. When you compare him with the two people he's always compared with, which is Salman and Amir, both of them came from film family. Both of them came from established film families. And that is what makes Shah Rukh even more unique. And a lot of people jokingly said that no one has affected migration in Bombay more than Shah Rukh Khan has, because once Shah Rukh became a phenomenon, every guy wanted to come to Bombay and become a star. When I look at Bollywood as a very small time historian, I realized there was one phase of people like Dilip Kumar and Sunil Dutt, who migrated in the wake of partition and everything, came to Bombay, started from scratch and became a star. Then there was a series of like just people from filmy family who were doing things, and the entire industry was dominated by these guys for a few decades. And then came Shah Rukh Khan and broke everything, and that inspired legions of like thousands of people to Shah Rukh gave hope. Shah Rukh gave people this hope that we can make it. We can make it.
Yeah. I also feel like so much of his early like movies and all involved him being so unconventional and taking a lot of risks. As you said, Bazigar and Dar were not Anjam, they were not conventional movies. He was doing movies like Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, where he doesn't get the girl. And in spite of that, like, he was just like so lovable. Like, what he just like, even in Dar and Bazigar, maybe this is just me, but he just somehow managed to make it work. Like, I wish that he could go back to being that risk taker and doing things that he probably wants to do instead of things that he should do. As you said, it has been 15 years almost. Om Shanti Om came out in 2007, and after that he has not done one movie that you want to talk about or one movie that you want to think of. I just wish he can go back and just, I don't know, he's smart enough to figure this out, and I'm sure he will. That much hope
that is so
and
true.
belief I have.
That is so true. Shah Rukh broke every possible convention as a lead actor in Bollywood. Like Bazigar, he kills a heroine. Like he kills the lead actor in the first half, and yet you root for him, and that was the charm of Shah Rukh Khan, amongst other factors as well. And yeah, but I think you and I have discussed this, but there is so much riding on him. I don't know, and it's a different podcast topic altogether. But sometimes we see comedians who do one show and they are famous enough, and then they want to try something, but say they don't get the expected audience reaction, and they never do that. And compare a famous comedian to Shah Rukh Khan. Shah Rukh Khan is at least 6,000 times more popular. So sometimes you look at him and you sometimes relate, saying, maybe I know what he's doing. Maybe he can. It's complicated. It is complicated.
Also, I mean, as a comedian, mostly you work yourself. I mean, it's just one person. I think sometimes you don't realize how much money is riding on these people. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, if I had 1,000 crores riding on me, I would not make certain decisions, or I would make certain decisions. Like, ultimately, like, they provide jobs to thousands of people, and Yeah, as I said, I will justify anything Shah Rukh does. I will find a way to justify.
No, but that's true. I mean, we are digressing here a bit, but why not? The point is, sometimes when people say, hey, these Bollywood celebrities never have opinions, that's one complaint that people always have, with Shah Rukh Khan included. Itna kuch chal raha hai desh mein, why don't you say? But are we ready to take their opinions like with maturity, with a certain level of acceptance? No, we are not. Like the moment Shah Rukh says something, it does not just affect him, it affects his movie. You start burning theaters where the movie is releasing. So you're affecting the livelihood of everyone involved in release of that movie. You go and break his sets. And when I say his, I mean anyone who makes an opinion. So that destroys the livelihood of everyone involved in film shoot. You're affecting livelihood of producers like set dada, costume dada, spot dada, everyone involved with the distribution, everyone working at these film companies. But we don't look at it that way. We're like, oh, you said something against us, let me see, तेरा movie release नहीं होने दूंगा. So why?
Yeah.
Cool. We'll go to a very different non-controversial topic now, Shremoy. This is our last topic because I can't help but not talk about books with you. I can literally see book covers behind you. So I know you're one of those people who read a lot. And when I say a lot, you read a lot. Okay, you read almost one book every day. You read very fast. You spend almost all your free time reading. And I've covered this earlier as well, a bit with other guests, but I can say with utmost confidence that I don't have any guest so far, or maybe in the future episodes also, who reads as much as you do. So I want to talk about reading. Like, how has it impacted your life? Why do you think reading is important? Or you can just also say that, hey, I just like doing it. You can no need to intellectualize it again. But I'm really curious as to what is your opinion on books, reading, and just this world of this wonderful world of, say, Kindle, or you even read on phone sometimes. I've seen you do that, or just good old classic conventional book reading, just reading in general.
I was one of those people who always read. I've been told I started reading earlier than most kids my age. Obviously, I don't remember that, but what I do remember is that I really liked stories, I think, because even before I could read, we had this illustrated Ramayan at home, and my parents used to read it out loud for me because I couldn't read then. I knew that story by heart. Like I couldn't read, but I could see a picture and I would tell you exactly what was written there. So that's one of the first stories I remember hearing. And I think my parents, after a point, were just like, we cannot spend so much time entertaining this person and telling her stories. So let's just teach her how to read and, make sure she just does it herself. So I started reading. I was privileged and lucky enough to have some books at home because my father used to, like, he still likes reading. Most people in my mom's family like reading. I have an elder brother. So he had gone through that period in his childhood where people were gifting him books and so on. So we had some books at home and I read all of that. My mother was very nice in the sense that she didn't let me buy a lot of books. And till I had my own money, I could not buy a lot of books. But she was very nice in the sense that there was a club library that they belonged to. So I would, like, every few months, I would make her a new list and I would give it to her. And she would, like, get me those books because I was not allowed in the library. It was for adults. But she would, take that list and make sure she got me all of those books. I had a school library, which was very well stocked. So I could read there. And I don't see this happening anymore, but so many of my friendships were based on, like, borrowing books from people. Not just my own friends, but my parents' friends. Like, once we went to my parents' friend's house and I saw that they had this really nice big bookshelf. And I was like, can I come here and just, like, borrow some books? So every month or every couple of weeks, my mother would take me to her friend's house and she'd just sit and chat and I'd just take some books, go home, read them. 2 weeks later, I would return them. And same with friends. I've legit had, like, me, not a friend, but there was this one girl in my class. And one day I saw that she has a book. Well, she told me that I have this particular book at home. I had never spoken to her before, but then I started calling her up to remind her to bring me that book. She got me the book. I read the book, I returned it, and I never spoke to her again. So that was my relationship with books. I just read because I liked it. looking back, I can say that I was probably a lonely child, didn't have a lot of playmates. I didn't, especially after a certain age, I wasn't really doing a lot of extracurriculars after school, didn't have a lot of, when I was a child, my parents still forced me to do the usual, like learn piano, learn Robindra Sangeet and whatever. But after a point, I was just sitting at home and reading. And I always say that the only skill I have is that I can read and I can read fast. Other than that, no skills. I have no motor skills. I can't drive. I can't swim. I can't do anything properly, but I can read. And yeah, I've always enjoyed reading. And I've spent so much time reading. And again, I can intellectualize and say that because I didn't have friends, it gave me a world of people and characters that I knew. I didn't travel a lot as a kid, so it gave me new worlds and whatever. But I think essentially it was just the stories. I liked hearing and reading these stories all the time, so I just wanted more of those. And I've
Wow.
legit had like, like most kids, when you're a child, your teachers tell your parents that, make sure they read more because it will help grammar and spelling and vocabulary and whatever. I've legit had parent teacher meetings where my teacher has told my mother she needs to stop reading. Just maths class is not for reading. Okay, this is not. I've like when I was a kid, one of the few things I was punished for in school was because I would read in math class. And my logic was I finished the sum. I was a decent student. It didn't take me one whole period to do like 3 sums. So I was reading. And I did that all my life. But I think when I grew up a little bit, I became smarter at hiding it. Um, but I would still read in class.
Thank you, Srimay. That brings us to the end of our conversation. Wonderful as expected. Thank you so much for taking out time. And now we are going to the fun part of random musings, which is the rapid fire. Very, very excited. Let's do it. Cool. Okay, we start with rapid fire. Srimay, only rule is you're not allowed to think. Okay, I'll ask around 10 questions and we'll go back to the answers to see if you have to add anything. Cool. Rapid fire with Srimay Das. Question number 1. Best book you've ever read.
The Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh.
Best thing about Delhi.
The food, you get really cosmopolitan, cheap food.
Best comedian to watch live.
Karan Gill.
Favorite Shah Rukh Khan movie.
Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na.
Favorite Satyajit Ray movie.
Aur Unne Din Ratri.
Favorite restaurant ever.
Pure nostalgia wise, Mocambo.
Most overrated book.
So many. A White Tiger.
Best thing about quizzing with the comedians.
Everything. I love everything about it.
Try and pick one.
Best thing about quizzing with the comedians. Oh man. I love everything about it.
Okay, cool. Favorite Indian author.
Amitav Ghosh.
One thing you like about Indian comedy scene. Or one thing you like the most about Indian comedy scene.
I feel like the comedy scene still allows people to, as I said, it's still democratic and it allows people to do their own things.
Cool. Thank you. See, here we go. Very nice, non-controversial rapid fire. We'll go back to each of your answers, Srimay. Best book you've ever read, you picked The Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh. Do you want to say why you picked it over at least 3 million other books that you've read?
I mean, obviously, I love a lot of books, and Shadow Lines is not the only one, but multiple reasons why I picked this. Personal reasons. It's a lot of it is set in Calcutta, and it's one of those books that I make it a point to read it every year, and every year I find something new, and I find a new way of looking at it. I also studied it in college, and I studied it at a time when I was very homesick, so it gave me a sort of connection to home. So I have like a personal connection with that book and personal great memories with the book. But just objectively, it's very well written. and it deals with concepts of history and memory and time uh, in a way that because these are not simple concepts, but he makes it very easy to grasp what he's saying, and I really like that.
Hmm. Nice. Best thing about Delhi, you picked food, and you also said cosmopolitan food at
Yeah.
why
So
do you
I
say that?
feel
Hmm.
compared to Calcutta and Bombay also, you get all kinds of food in Delhi. Like all kinds of cuisines, and because there are of course like South Indian food and so on, because like Andhra Bhavan, and there are all the state like food that you get, but you also get a lot of, I guess because of the embassies and so on, you also get
Hmm.
a lot of cuisines from abroad. And what I particularly like about Delhi is that most of this food is very affordable, and even as a college student you can try out a lot of new cuisines, and most of it is also really good.
Hmm. Best comedian to watch live. I know I ask you live is because you, for longest part of your career, you've seen comedians live every single evening. So, and you pick Kanan Gill. Do you want to talk about Kanan?
Yes. I mean, one of the things I enjoy the most about comedy producing is that I get to watch these, like my favorite comedians live. I find the process really interesting, how one small bit grows into like a special, and how every night there is a change in maybe the phrasing of a joke or just the performance of a joke. And I love the process. So I'm never someone who will say that I've already seen this show before, I won't watch it again. I can watch trial show after trial show after trial show. And there are many comics whose process I really enjoy. But Kanan is my favorite because he has a very unique way of looking at things that are, you would just find it regular. Like he's
Hmm.
not talking about something that you've never thought of, but he has a very unique way of looking at it, which I really like. And I've seen him performing live a lot, and every time I feel like he brings this new energy or this unpredictability to the stage that is just beautiful. When he does concept shows or some of these format shows, he just has so much fun with them. Like when you, as I said, when you watch comedians every night, it can get monotonous. You're seeing them perform the same things over and over again. So it's very important for me that I get a sense that the comedian is having fun. And I get that a lot with Kanan. Not saying, of course, that this is not true for other people. This is like, I feel that about a lot of people who I watch. And I've been privileged enough to watch like this set of like Kenny Kanan Biswa live a lot. But if I had to pick one, I will always pick Kanan.
Okay. Favorite Shah Rukh Khan movie? Like many of us Shah Rukh Khan fans, you went with Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na. What do you think makes Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na more unique than many of his other blockbusters?
It's, I mean, such a great role. And I love the fact that it doesn't have that conventional ending. Um, it's one of his best, earliest works that I really enjoy. There's a certain innocence about that movie and that performance that is not there in his later performances. Is it his best performance in a movie? I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
But overall, as a movie, it's just what a, like
Hmm.
I love that movie so much. I also want to say that I don't watch that movie a lot. I've
Yeah.
probably seen it only once in my life, or maximum twice, because it's a very sad movie, and I can't I can't do that to myself. But it's still the one that I love the most.
Yeah. Yeah. Very related. Yeah. Okay. Favorite Satyajit Ray movie? You are a Ray fan without doubt. Another Bong stereotype, if I may say so. And you pick Arone Din Ratri. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk about? Sorry
Yeah.
for the
So it's
mispronunciation. Sorry.
Yeah, it's Orone Din Ratri, and in English, I think the English translation is called Days and Nights in the Forest.
Hmm.
It has a great cast: Shomitra Chatterjee, Sharmila Tagore, Simi Garwal's there in a small role. Robi Ghosh, who's like a Bengal superstar, great comic timing, and one of the bests probably. It's basically about the group of boys who go to jungle and have to spend some time there. The original ZNMD is what a lot of people in Calcutta said before when ZNMD came out. Um, it's not one of Ray's most critically acclaimed movies, and I know why also. But I personally find it really comforting. It's very, very funny, and the acting is great. And Sharmila Tagore and Soumitra Chatterjee just look so good in that movie.
Favorite restaurant ever? I know this was a tough one to pick, but you went with Mukambo in Calcutta.
Yeah.
What makes Mukambo unique, Srimoy?
So much of, I think most people my age or like our age in Calcutta will have some nostalgia related to Mocambo. We've all heard our parents talk about it. And more ever since I was a child, I've been hearing Mocambo is not as good as it was 15 years ago. But I mean, I went in February with you, and it was still great. They have something called continental food, which is basically British food. It's supposed to be European. But they have these dishes that you don't really find outside Calcutta, and they do it really well. So, yeah, purely for nostalgic reasons. I'm sure there are better restaurants that I have been to, especially in Calcutta. But that's the first thing that I thought of.
Most overrated book? You picked a Booker Prize winner. I I remember when the White Tiger Head came, it was a rage everywhere, and everyone was reading about it. And suddenly Arvind Adiga won the Booker, which was like, is he the new Rushdie? Like, what is happening? But yeah, of course, you think it's the most overrated book. Why do you think so?
But firstly, Booker doesn't mean like any book prize doesn't mean anything. There are lots of bad books that win prizes, like lots of bad movies that win Oscars and film fairs or whatever. But this particular book, I never liked it. I was very young when I read it, and this glorification of poverty and this. I particularly hate Indians who write with a Western audience in mind. Like this whole attempt to make us look more desi than we are is I hate it across the board. Whoever does it, I really, really hate it. And but a lot of these books are not so critically acclaimed. Whereas, White Tiger obviously, it won a Booker. It got made into a really successful movie. Everyone keeps talking about it, and it's so bad. Nobody with any sense, I feel, has been able to read that whole book and say that, like, you can read it and in that whole adrenaline you'll be like, okay, this is good, but you think about it for half a day and nobody I respect has turned around and said this book is good.
Fair. Okay.
I told you I'm very opinionated.
Yes 100%. Yeah. Best thing about Quizzing with the Comedians, and I'll give a context to people as to why I asked this question to Srimoy. I never ask about Quizzing with the Comedians to any guest on Random Musing, but I asked because, and I've said this before, as to how Srimoy has been a part of Quizzing with the Comedians right from the beginning. It is a show because, to some extent, because of the motivation that Srimoy gave me back in the day, and till date she's involved behind the scene in terms of programming and in terms of many other behind the scene logistic things that we do that people don't get to see. So I asked you, and you said you love everything about Quizzing with the Comedian. Do you want to talk about this? Because I can't myself. So just take 2 minutes and talk about Quizzing with the Comedian, Srimoy.
Yeah. So I remember sitting at a coffee shop with you and telling you that we have to do Quizzing with a Comedian. And I did what seems to really work with most people, which is that I gave you a deadline and I said, by this date, we have to have this show ready. So now let's backtrack and see what we can, how to make it perfect by the time this date comes. And I think by the time we did the first show, it was such a great show. I love quizzing. I've been quizzing since I was a child. And this has everything that I enjoy. It has stand-up, it has quizzing. I get to give my opinion on the programming and the curation, and you don't take it a lot of times, but I still give my opinions. Yes. And it's great to see what quizzing has become, because when we started quizzing, we did it for a 25-30 people audience, and I've I attend every one of your live tapings whenever you're taping for YouTube. And I see that 200 people are watching, and then I see the numbers that it reaches on YouTube, and I'm like, well, I'm not a proud parent, but I'm like a proud aunt when I see what quizzing has become, and I see how devoted the fan base is, and I see so many people who buy, like your season like whatever festival passes, weekend passes when you have the taping, and I see so many people log in for YouTube premieres, especially people who log in from different time zones, and they wake up like early in the morning. It's beautiful to see that, because when do you see that in like, forget about a quiz, even for somebody to do that for a comedy show is such a big deal. And so many people do it. It's just one of those things, like when you start off small, like when you look back, it's just like, I can't believe how much it has grown. But also I just want to say that when we did that first show, I knew that it would grow. Like, I would not have asked you to do it if I thought that this has no potential. So I always, like, it doesn't surprise me, but it makes me very happy.
Yeah, to give context to a lot of people might not know, because people started following it on YouTube, that this was essentially an offline show for 25, 30, 40 people, 50 people. I think we did it in small venues in Bombay, where there would be a prelims round for ticket buyers, and then 3 of them would be picked, and then they will be paired with a comedian, and we'll do a proper full-fledged final on stage. But then pandemic happened, and we moved it to an online version. And the rest is online history. And we taped a latest edition last week, and it will release on YouTube later. But very excited. Yes, Shimai, sorry.
Yeah, I also want to say that it was such a lifesaver during the pandemic, especially because I think you started doing quizzing in 2020 April, May. I think was when you had the first taping, and that was right in the middle of the lockdown. Nobody really knew what was happening. There didn't seem to be an end in sight, and it just gave us something to do and something to look forward to. And like, the quizzing weekends were the best weekends for us, crazy people who watch every match. Like, sometimes I do the dry run with you if I'm not taking part in a quiz, and I still watch every match, and it's like the highlight of my month, because I just, like, the whole weekend is sorted. I cook on Friday night, and then I eat that same food for two days, because I just want to watch quiz and I want to follow. It's like a proper tournament that you want to follow, and you have a favorite, and it's like a proper sports tournament that way.
Okay, your favorite Indian author? I sort of expected this answer, Amitav Ghosh. What do you think makes Amitav Ghosh unique compared to other Indian authors?
So Amitav Ghosh is a trained historian, anthropologist. So a lot of his books have a lot of history. A lot of them are set in different periods of time, and it's full of very well-researched facts. But he manages to create worlds that are so detailed and beautiful. That's what I like about his later works. I always say that I can forgive anything if the writing style is good, but and he's amazing, and also he's Bengali, which always helps.
Okay, the last one I asked you was because Indian comedy scene, because again, you are as a comedy producer, you are a part of this scene every single day. Like, as a comedian, you can afford to chill a day, but a comedy producer cannot, because you have a show every single day. And you said you like the democratic nature of in comedy scene. Do you want to further elaborate that?
So one thing is what I earlier said, which is that if you don't like something, comedy just allows you to do it yourself. It allows you to play around with your style, with your jokes, like till now at least it has. And it's very democratic in the sense that so many people exist in the scene doing so many different kind of things, and they all seem to be working, which is great. I know the argument is that we are not united, and that everybody is like looking out for their own selves, but I like the individuality in the comedy scene. That's precisely what I like. I like how everybody has their own take on comedy, how everybody has an idea of what comedy should look like, what is good comedy, what kind of comedy they want to do. And most people, I feel, get that space to explore and develop and act on their thoughts, which is what I like.
Thank you, Srimay. That was the last question. And thank you so much for being a part of Random Musings. And yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot. Means
Thank
a
you.
lot to me. Thank you. And yeah, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, please do like, share, and subscribe to Random Jigwam. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcast, please subscribe to the podcast and please review it. Give us some rating so more people get to hear this amazing conversation that we have every week, every Wednesday. Thank you.